Okay, let's begin with the first concept, which is what is consumer surplus? So what is consumer surplus? And I will illustrate it using an example. So we assume that maybe we have a demand function, which is, or the inverse demand function given by P equals 10 minus Q. And our supply function is given by P equals 2 plus Q. So that's very simple. And then let's draw those two lines. So the demand has an intercept of 10, goes down with a slope of 1, so it goes from 10 to 10. And let's make it a little bit bigger. And the supply function starts at 2 and has a slope of 1. So it's like this. So this is our demand and our supply. And now just to recall again, what is a demand function? Well, a demand function is a horizontal aggregation of people's willingness to pay. So there's always someone who is maybe having a high willingness to pay, and that person with a high willingness to pay is lined up here on top, and then there's the one with the second highest willingness to pay, and every red dot can be thought of as an individual. And of course, on a demand function, there are essentially a million consumers. So you can see that market will clear at a equilibrium price of 6, and that's a really good circle. So the equilibrium price is 6 and the equilibrium quantity is 4. So that is the equilibrium that we have. Okay, so now all those individuals whose willingness to pay is greater than what they do have to pay, so everyone has to pay 6, that is where the market clears. But there are some people, they go to the market and actually would pay much more, but of course the sellers don't know their true willingness to pay, but those people get now surplus. And that surplus for the first individual would be this distance here. Okay, now the second person has the same, has also surplus, and the third person gets surplus, because everyone has a willingness to pay which is actually higher than what they do have to pay. So this green area is what we call consumer surplus. So in words, consumer surplus is the area below the demand function and above the price, all the way up to where the market clears. Okay, and this is like what it looks like, a little bit simpler. So what is consumer surplus? It's the same green triangle, looks a little bit nicer than what we just derived. So again, the demand function can be thought of as a lineup of consumers according to their willingness to pay. However, because all consumers pay the same price, consumers with a willingness to pay which exceeds the price, they receive a consumer surplus. So and again, the willingness to pay is the maximum price a consumer would pay in order to realize a certain utility. And marginally, if the consumer paid as much as her willingness to pay, the cost of consumption would be exactly equal to the utility. And the marginal utility is again the reservation price of consumers, meaning that a price that prices higher than the marginal utility, consumers wouldn't buy. So that at prices, I'm supposed to call, that price is higher than the marginal utility, consumers would not buy. Okay, so I hope that is clear, so that we have to think of the demand as a lineup of consumers, and then we compare their actual willingness to pay to the price that they do have to pay. And this distance, if somebody has a higher willingness to pay than what they actually do have to pay, they collect consumer surplus. And graphically, we can illustrate that by that area, and later we will actually calculate that area, but since it is a triangle, then we can calculate the height 1, 2, 3, 4, and the base 1, 2, 3, 4. So now we would say in this particular case, consumer surplus is 4 times 4, but it's a triangle, so we have to divide by 2. So consumer surplus is 8. And again, this is how we calculate the area of a triangle, because base times height, that gives you a square. But since we have only half a square, like in this case we had like this area here, so we calculate this area as 4 times 4, which is 16. We divide by 2, we get 8. Okay, so let's stop here, and then in the next video we'll move to the producer surplus, which is a very similar concept.